be my guide. Together. I let peace be my guide. Thank you, Sean. That was beautiful. All right. Thank you all for singing and clapping and shaking it out.
All right. So, as we get to the end of our speakers, I'm reminded of something because I originally had our next speaker in another spot, and someone reminded me that it used to be considered one of the greatest honors to be that closing speaker because you're giving people something to carry with them. And I think that our next speaker is absolutely there. I've had board members who called me and asked me to put them in this spot. So today, I'm excited because I don't think she's ever spoken at an INTA Congress before. And I want to make sure she's ready because I see some back things going on in the back there. I'll tell you that Rev Sandra J. Campbell, she is an ordained Unity minister. She is the executive director of Unity Urban Ministerial School. And from that point, from that school, she graduated from there in 2012. She serves on the board of directors of Unity World Headquarters, and she is a member of Unity Temple on the Plaza in Kansas City, Missouri. There she leads the metaphysical Bible class, the midweek service, and Sunday services. Reverend Sandra is a cultural anthropologist, an award-winning storyteller, a playwright, a historical reenactor, and an accomplished speaker. Today, she's going to share something that I think is, again, carry it forward over this next year. Release your inner genius. So, Reverend Sandra J. Campbell, please give her a hand.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Tim. Thank you. We first met at the Parliament of the World's Religions, my first time attending there, and my first time here at the INTA. Let me tell you a little bit about how I got into New Thought. I was 21 years old, and I was struggling. I was pregnant with my second child. I was 8 months pregnant. I worked for the federal government. I started working for the federal government when I was 19. I retired at 62, 2 months before I graduated from Unity Urban Ministerial School. I made my way up from a clerk stenographer. I still take shorthand, 90 going north, so I'm one of those dinosaurs. And you'll see, if you see my notes, you'll see lots of shorthand where I've been writing down word for word many of the things you all have said. And a woman saw me crying in the restroom, just crying my eyes out. And she went away, and then she came back, and I was still in there. And I was like a chameleon. I tried to hide my feelings. I tried not to let on to anybody that my life felt like it was going in the wrong direction. I was married. I got married at the end of my junior year in high school. Wow. And I graduated with my class when my daughter was 6 months old. She's now 55. And I really felt like the world was turning against me. No matter how much my family told me that I was beautiful and I just needed to get rid of the excess baggage that I was married to at the time, I wouldn't listen. I was just a teenager, you know, and I learned about Ozzie and Harriet and my 3 sons and all those stories that we believed and we were influenced by, that I could live like that, even though none of them looked like me back in the 60s. So Joanne Franklin comes back into the restroom and she says, "Are you a Christian?" And I said, "Yes. Why do you ask?" She said, "Would you read something if I bring it to you?" And she said, "You know, you're absolutely beautiful, and I just can't understand what in your life could be so bad that you're crying your eyes out." The next day, she brought me a book. I wish I'd brought it with me. Hidden Power for Human Problems. Thank you. I'm glad you know that book, by Frederick Bailey. I didn't sleep that night. So I came back the next day and I found Joanne worked in accounting. And I gave Joanne the book back. And she proceeded to scold me for wasting her time. there's no way you read this book overnight. I guess she couldn't tell by the bags under my eyes that I hadn't slept. And when I told her a few things I remembered that I could quote from memory from the book, she got excited. And she says, "What are you doing Wednesday?" She drove all the way I'm from Kansas City, Kansas, about 25 minutes from here. And she was in Kansas City, Missouri. She drove all the way out to western Wyandotte County, picked me and my little 4-year-old up, drove me back to her part of town in Kansas City, Missouri. We walked 2 houses up the street from her, and there were people sitting in a family room in a circle. Now, I grew up in the Baptist church, and they were talking in a language that I didn't speak, but I was mesmerized. And so after that meeting, and she took me and my daughter back home, I was on fire. I'd never heard of unity, though I grew up not far from here. Never heard of the Daily Word, never heard of New Thought, none of that. This was new, this was exciting. And when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. Now, my family had been trying to get me to see that I deserved more, that I was better, that I was beautiful, and all these things, but it was falling on deaf ears because they loved me. They were supposed to say those things. But what she said and what she did for me turned my life around. And I determined from that day forward that I was going to take my mess and turn it into a message, my test, and turn it into a testimony that would help other people, as Joanne and New Thought have helped me. So if I can get this to come back on, there we go. Is it on?
It'll take a second.
Okay. Why did I title this, Release Your Inner Genius? Because we all have the ability. We've been hearing about all these geniuses all week. These people were phenomenal. Absolutely, I'll call him Double T, Judge Double T also, so that I don't get the Troward and the Troward mixed up. So I thought I'd start with this funny thing because I love humor, and Sean O'Shea got me started. So I always provide a PowerPoint for my talks on Sundays. And Cassie noticed something strange about my PowerPoint on the power of imagination. And I didn't pay any attention. All I saw was Einstein with the third eye. So Cassie, who puts together the PowerPoints for me, and I send them to her, she calls me and says, "Reverend Sandra, you sure you want to use that slide?" And I go, "It's Einstein with a third eye. It's about imagination." She said, "He's smoking pot." I don't know if you can. In some places, not in Missouri yet, but he's smoking pot. And I thought, shoot. That was a good slide. And it even says at the bottom, stoner. It says stoner days. I missed the whole thing. Thank God Cassie is a genius. So I found one that's better. Your imagination is your preview of life's coming attractions. Joanne Franklin that day opened up a whole new world for me of imagination. I could imagine myself now outside of the circumstances I had created and moving into a higher level of consciousness. So I was like a kid in a candy store. Joanne took me to the first Unity church I'd ever attended. It was downtown Kansas City. His name was Reverend Moritz Erhardt. I'll never forget him. Had a thick German accent. By that time, I had had the baby, and 2 years later, it was Moritz Erhardt who did the eulogy for my son. Unity and New Thought have catapulted me into some amazing experiences that I love to share with other people. And so what is genius? Why did I choose that title? Exceptional, intellectual, or creative power or other natural ability, according to the Oxford Dictionary. According to Wikipedia, it's a characteristic of original and exceptional insight in the performance of some art or endeavor that surpasses expectations, sets new standards for the future, establishes better methods of operation, or remains outside the capabilities of competitors. Now, doesn't that sound like New Thought? Yeah. And this power of imagination, and I'll get into because I learned that in unity, the 12 powers. I was going to show you this. I'm going to share this with you so you can take a picture. You need to watch this. If you want to know about genius, watch America's Got Talent. And this young man, this 2-year-old, can do math better than any of us with a calculator. He has no calculator. He's 2 years old. He's standing there with his father. They give him some numbers. Even Simon Cowell tries to trick him up. This little boy could work those mathematic expressions so quickly. Not the new math. He's like doing old math, so quickly. Yeah, he is a reincarnation. He definitely is. So I want to talk about this power of genius through the 12 powers. I'd never heard of the 12 powers until I got into Unity. And I've taught youth education at Unity here at Unity Village and Unity of Baltimore, Unity on the Plaza, for probably 30 years. And I love teaching what taught me, what I learned that helped me to find a new way of thinking, as Charles Roth put it. So we know that Emma Curtis Hopkins, whom you've talked about a lot this week, she was the teacher of teachers of New Thought. And she taught her students, including Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who founded Unity. She taught them that we each have 12 innate faculties, 12 innate powers. We're born with them. And then Charles Fillmore said, if there are 12 powers, and this 12 is a significant number, it means completion, fulfillment. So we must correlate that to the 12 months of the year. So maybe there's a power for each month. And then he studied the world's wisdom teachings. He looked at chakras, the nerve centers in the body, and said those 12 powers each must relate to some part of our physical beingness. And then he said, what about those 12 that we hear about all the time? Not the only disciples in that textbook we call the Bible, but those 12 that we know by name. What if we could make a relationship to the characteristics of each of those 12, and they could be related to each power in us? And then because, as we talked about earlier, because synergy and energy come in spectrums, and we can find energy. We can see, some people have the ability to see our energy spectrum, our field, our aura. And remember those old mood rings in the 60s? So if we can correlate that to the color vibration, the energy vibration, each of us vibrates at a different level, and that shows up by people who can see it in certain colors. And so he correlated that to the energy vibration. And then where is that physical location in that nerve center in the body? The imagination is the third eye. If your eye be single, right? Single. These two eyes can fool you. Your eyes can play tricks on you. But that eye, the power of imagination, the power of creativity, that's where the genius is. And when we align all of our 12 powers together, we're operating, as they say, we're operating on all cylinders. All the world is perfect. So I do a little diagram. On Sunday mornings, I talk to the person who just walked in the door, who knows very little, if anything, about Unity, about New Thought. And I just say, this is for the person. How many of you are new here? How many of you are visiting for the first time? How many of you have never been to Unity before? So I give them a little overview. I tell about Charles Fillmore. I mention the Bible, and I say, let me clear this up for you. The Bible is one of many textbooks. It's not the only textbook. It's one of many. The Quran is a textbook. It's one of many textbooks. It's about the evolution of human consciousness from our Genesis, which is the very first book, our beginning. We all have a Genesis. To Revelation, not the end of times, the end of a time in your life, where you achieve a certain level of consciousness. You rise above those things that no longer serve your purpose, and now you're at a higher level. So you go back to your Genesis at a higher level. It's a circle. It's a circle. It's like Maslow's theory. It's a circle. So I usually put up a little diagram to kind of give you a little idea of flavor, and I try to choose a picture that's more depicting than what I learned growing up of who these people might have looked like. So the disciple here is Nathaniel, or Bartholomew, which was his last name. And as you know the story, Jesus sees Nathaniel before Nathaniel realizes he sees him, before he's even there, sitting under a fig tree. And his friend says to him, I think it was Peter, says to him, hey, I want you to meet this guy. He's a guru, he's a master, he's a Messiah. And where's he come from? He comes from Nazareth. Did anything good ever come from Nazareth? They say that about the Dot. I'm from Wyandotte County. We call it the Dot. You can look it up. It's actually called the Dot by nickname. Does anything good come out of Wyandotte County? You know, so that's what he says. And he says, well, I'll check it out. He opened his chakras, opened his mind, his imagination, said, okay, I won't just take your word for it, but I will check it out for myself. I'll go and see. And so the color is light blue. Now, normally I dress in that color. You know, I'll have my nails will be painted that color or something will be painted that color. But this month, for July, is the power of understanding, and it's gold. And I never wear gold. I only wear silver. But I decided this month is going to be my gold month, my power of understanding. But when I put this together for you all, I was using my power of imagination last month. So I want to stick to that. And Matthew 6:22 says, your eye is a lamp that provides light. Your eye is a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. Imagination. Imagination. So I heard a little bit about these 5 basic principles, and I got a text saying, can you get the little book for somebody on the 5 basic principles? So I just want to first talk about principle, because that's what New Thought's all about. It's all about principle. I didn't learn about principle growing up in the Baptist church. I learned about hellfire and brimstone. A lot. And Jesus is the Savior. And he died for our sins. And he shed his blood. And he bore the stripes. Oh, all of that. So, principle, a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as a foundation for a system of belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. When Connie Fillmore Basie, the granddaughter of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, was asked, can you synthesize your grandparents' teachings? Can you synthesize the teachings of unity? She put the synthesis into 5 basic principles. What I say to people who come into the church for the first time, don't know anything about unity, we have no dogmas, no creeds, just like all of New Thought. You can chew the meat and spit out the bones. You can listen in and see if there's something that you can pluck out of it, that you can take with you. And we're not trying to tell you how to think and what to think, but these are principles. They're irrefutable principles that God is. God is, by whatever name you call, it is. Everywhere present, all powerful, all knowledge. That we are made in the image and likeness of the divine, and therefore we are all that God is. We are the essence of God. That we co-create, and this is where that power of imagination comes in. This is where your inner genius comes in, because we have the ability to co-create whatever our imaginations can conceive. I love what Eric Butterworth said when he formulated that basic formula, C plus B equals A. Conceive it and believe it, and you will achieve it. Conceive it and believe it, and you will achieve it. It's through our thoughts, our words, and our actions. We create our experiences, not our circumstances, by what we choose. And that's the operative word. What we choose to think, what we choose to feel, what we choose to believe. And we can change our thoughts. And as Norman Vincent Peale said, when we do that, we change our world. And then how do we align our thinking with God mind, with the creator, with the source? Through affirmative prayer and meditation. Troward talks about affirmative prayer. I like the story of how he sat with his mother's big Bible in front of him and spent hours focusing on the truth, the interpretation of that. And the final and 5th principle, which I think is the most important, is we live the truth we know. You can't know what you don't know. Until Joanne Franklin handed me that book and I went home and read it, I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know that I had the power to change my life by changing my mind. And from that day forward, I was like a woman with her hair on fire. And everybody around me knew it. Uh-oh. So I wanted to talk about some of the spiritual masters. And I can't help, I mentioned the other day, Ruth Mosley doesn't get mentioned very often, so I wanted to make sure we mention Ruth Mosley. Because Ruth Mosley said, after Reverend Johnny Coleman wrote a letter, and I have a copy of the July 1978 Ebony magazine in which her letter appeared as a story about the hypocrisy of unity. not treating black students the same way they treated the other students. And you heard some of that story. Well, Ruth Mosley was asked, so what are you going to do about it? What can we do to help you? She says, we need our own school. Educate us. Let us educate ourselves, so to speak. And they poo-pooed the idea for quite a while. She kept coming back, sort of like Genevieve Barron. You know, she just kept coming back. She wasn't going to take no for an answer. And finally said, okay, fine. People like Ed Rabel and Eric Butterworth and others stood on her bandwagon and got her approved to start this school. And said, okay, you can start the school, but we're not going to give you any money. And Ruth said, that's okay. They said it couldn't be done, but she did it anyway. A few years ago, Ruth Mosley, Dr. Catherine Thomas, Reverend Vertel Alexander Telefero, and Reverend Argentina Glasgow and others got together and said, let's start an online school. And when that proposal came to the powers that be, they said, that ain't gonna work. She did it anyway. It started in 1979, and we're celebrating our 45th anniversary. The genius. Release your inner genius. Don't let anybody else tell you what you can and cannot do. If it's your passion, God has given it to you. No one else can do it but you. And it's hard because sometimes our own families and friends will tell us, you know, that's a dumb idea. You shouldn't do that. That won't. If it's yours to do, everything you need will be put in front of you to do it. But you got to pursue it. You got to pursue it. So we're starting a prison ministry program, The Power of Imagination and Genius. And it kicks off this coming Tuesday with a workshop for anybody who's just interested in finding out what the urban school is going to be doing with this. And we have members who are with CSL and UFBL who are on our committees helping us plan this and organize it. So that will be the workshop. The fall term begins August 14th. The first class will be in the fall term. It'll be about how do we address people who are in facilities, who are incarcerated. Then the second class will address those who've been released. And the third class, it's going to be talking to ministers and lay people about how they can develop a plan of their own to go into these systems. And one of our students is right here. You've been seeing her all week, and that's Kristen Cherry. She's at Unity of Columbia, Missouri, and she has worked she's worked within the system in the Columbia and Jefferson City areas with prisoners, so she's been a big help to us as well. And we welcome everybody. You don't have to be a Unity student for this certification. So it'll be 3 classes, one in the fall, one in the spring, and one in the winter, and one in the spring. And then the student will be responsible for creating their own pathway because they have to go through their local, state, and federal jurisdictions. Everybody, we are not all equal in order to know what they can and can't do, and probably have to work with some of the evangelical chaplains who are established in those places and usually don't like to share with New Thought. But we're trying to get a toehold, and I know some of you have already done it, but we're trying to get our foot in the water because I don't think we can get too many of us working on this. Genius. I serve on the UWH board with the wonderful CEO, Reverend Jim Blake. And we had to make a decision. Unity World Headquarters Board. Property, people, and prayer. That's my summary. So we had to make a decision that we could no longer afford to continue Unity Online Radio. And there were a lot. How many of you have done? Yes, I knew there were some in this room that have broadcast. And when it went away, we were in tears. And we still hear about it. Well, Reverend Graham Johnson from Australia contacted Mark Hicks, who used to be on our board at the Urban School, and said, hey, I'm turning 83. My wife's turning 83. We're in Melbourne, Australia. We have this email thing we have been going on for 13 years with people from the outback, from Pakistan and everywhere who we just send Bible lessons to. And then if they complete 12, they get a certificate, and some of them, he said, posted on in their little hut or wherever. They only have cell phones. They're not necessarily interested in being ministers or teachers, but they like that interaction, learning about the Bible. So he wanted someone to take this over, and we're trying to figure out, we don't have the bandwidth, the resources to do that. But one of our webmaster, Reverend Richard Pacheco out of West Virginia, came up with this brilliant idea. He said, well, we could reach everybody like Charles Fillmore did with WOQ radio back in the 1920s. We could reach everybody if we had a radio program. Now, it's not a podcast, but any of you, if you send an MP3, an MP4, even a Zoom, Richard will upload it and have you broadcast. And what we're hoping is we can make such success out of this that we can get a grant, so we're not just penny pinching, but it is phenomenal. So you're all welcome. You know, take a picture of Richard's email address. It's on our banner line at uums.org. It says UUMS Radio. And we call it the Anointed Radio. Why? Back a few slides ago, I didn't cover this, but when Reverend Ruth had this dream about this school to reach people in the urban core who were not being exposed to these principles, she wanted, what could I base this on? And she chose Isaiah 61:1. For the Spirit of God is upon me, for God has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to comfort the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and freedom to those who are imprisoned. And we're not talking necessarily just about people that are locked up behind bars. We're talking about imprisoned. Because if I were, heaven forbid, locked up, you can lock up my body, but you cannot lock up my mind without my permission. And if we could teach the tools for the resources, the tools that we know work, think of what mighty works we could do. So we stand on that Isaiah 61:1 mission, and that last prong of that mission is to release those who are imprisoned. So our job, we're not trying to get people out of prison. We're not working necessarily through the legal system. What we're working on is giving them some tools. So we're starting with lessons in truth, the basics. And many of these facilities have laptops. They allow their inmates to have laptops. Courageous conversations. You heard a little bit about that when Reverend Jackie Fernandez spoke. Right after Dylan Roof killed the 9 people in a Bible study at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, I got this, I don't know what it was, a download that the next time I speak, I need to say, what is ours to do? So I asked the question, what is ours to do? We love to pray and meditate.
What is mine to do?
What is mine to do? We love to pray and meditate. We do. But that doesn't solve everything. And I know that there's enough energy in this room that if we're all sitting together meditating, we can every light would get brighter. That's true. But we're not always on the same page. We're not always doing the same thing. We're not always thinking in the same direction. And if we were like the Jericho wall, we could bring it down. If there were enough of us marching across in the same direction at the same time, we'd have such a vibration that we would bring these walls down. But we're not there yet. We will be. We are getting there. And in this, my first INTA, I can tell you, I know that we're on the cusp of getting there. We're touching the hem right now. So how do we do this? And I asked the question, and 3 people came up after the service and said, I want to know how to do it. I want to do something. And we started talking. And then 3 more people the following Sunday, and pretty soon we had 12 people sitting around in a meeting room at the church asking questions about what is mine to do. We started doing book studies. We partnered with the Church of the Resurrection United Methodist Church, which is huge in Kansas City. And they had us come join them with other 2 Catholic churches, another Methodist church, a Church of God in Christ, and we went to a private showing of Best of Enemies, which is a true story in 1971, Durham, North Carolina. Look it up. It's on Netflix, so you want to watch that. And we had a talk, we had a discussion afterwards. People from different faiths, people from different backgrounds, people of different cultures. We had questions. We talked to each other. That's what it's going to take. So courageous conversations. My church is 95% Caucasian, 95% white, and I'm the only black minister. So to create that space where everybody can feel safe enough to have a conversation, not judging, but listening, we all need to do that. And if you want to join, it's on Zoom ever since COVID, and most of my participants are from Unity of Roseville, California. So I changed the time so that they could be out of church in time to get to Courageous Conversations, and we have some great discussions. Guest speakers, So when we think about creative genius, I just had to show this because we all have this in us. George Washington Carver, not far from here, an hour and a half, Diamond, Missouri. He was orphaned. He was found, his mother and he, as a baby, were kidnapped. They never found his mother. They found him. He had whooping cough so bad that he spoke. If you ever heard any radio or broadcast of George Carver, he talked like this. And you would look at him and go, how can he be such a genius? He talks like this because it fried his vocal cords when he was a baby. But this man invented over 200 things from the peanut, the sweet potato, and soybeans that we use today, like linoleum tile, paint, all kinds, oil, all kinds of things. Why? Because he knew how to use his creative genius. And he didn't care about the fact he had been a slave. He went on to graduate from the University of Iowa, and he went on to become a scientist. And he was an archaeologist too, or a scientist and he was so many things. Plant, he knew all about plants. He helped the Germans save the cotton from the boll weevil. He didn't even ask for money. And he went to Tuskegee and headed their science department. Now, when you think about creative genius, what about the Jetsons? I thought it was just a cartoon. Do you know how much creativity you have right here? Have you ever seen something that just came out and you go, I thought about that. I could have done that. I had that vision when I was a little kid. What about the Jetsons? We have a moving sidewalk at every airport. We have a flat screen TV where we can even talk to Mr. Snively if he was a real person like George Jetson did. We have robots. We have robotic surgery. I mean, all those things that we thought were a cartoon. I'm wearing my Dick Tracy watch. You too? I had no idea that Dick Tracy, I know, we can talk, yeah. He was a detective, a comic strip detective, but who had that kind of genius? All these things were just envisioned in somebody's mind. Walt Disney spent most of his years in the Kansas City area. Grew up in Marceline, Missouri. He was originally from Chicago. And he had a mouse in his office, not far from here on 31st Street in Kansas City, Missouri. And this little mouse, he called Mickey. And that mouse made him a fortune. I'm deathly afraid of mice, but if there was one that could make me a fortune, I think I'd adopt it. Genius is born out of imagination. We all have this power. It's right here, right here. Frank Eckstein, when he was 11 years old, I think that was his name, he left soda pop out in San Francisco. It was a cold night. He left soda pop with a stirrer outside it froze. He called it the X-sicle when he finally patented it. And when his children were coming along, they said, this is one of Pop's sickles. So I got the name Popsicle. I have some dum-dums back there on the table. This is the 100th anniversary of the Popsicle and the dum-dums that when they were patented. So dum-dums was named that because the man's children could pronounce it. Dum-dums. How many of you use Kleenex?
Too much.
But we call them Kleenex. Why?
I don't know.
Because they're not necessarily Kleenex. They could be, yeah. But somebody's powerful imagination. They were made by Kimberly Clark for cold cream, for women to remove cold cream from their faces, and eventually they became tissues for other purposes. Imagination. We all got this genius, but we don't all use it. And we look at other people and go, darn, I could have been an Elon Musk. But I don't know anything about mechanics, so I know that wouldn't be me. How about this? Who doesn't know the jingle? I am stuck on Band-Aid brands because Band-Aid stuck on me. Yeah, 100 years, 100 years. And then look at this power of imagination. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, 1924. 1924. We've got beauty shop, we've got barber shop, we've got Gone with the Wind, and what a great imagination Frank L. Baum had when he came up with The Wizard of Oz. Yeah. I'm talking about the power of imagination. Frank B. Whitney was head of Silent Unity. When he came up with the idea through his inner genius And you know, it's good to pray with people and maybe send them a little telegram or a letter. But wouldn't it be great if we put that in a book? Let's put it in a book. So this year we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of a genius idea called the Daily Word. It's in 5 languages, more than 100 countries around the world, and people who don't even know New Thought or believe in New Thought read the Daily Word.
That's true.
Some of our biggest benefactors who've left mega dollars to Unity, never been to Unity, never heard of Daily Word, CSL, UFBL, any of that. But their mother or grandmother or even they read the Daily Word, and so they left because they wanted to leave a legacy. They left it to the Daily Word. I live on the Daily Word, and I'm going to tell you a personal story. 50 years ago this coming November, 51 years ago, before November, I was at work. I'd gotten my divorce, and I met this young Marine. The Marine Corps had their offices downstairs. I worked for General Services Administration. I retired from the Federal Aviation Administration in 2012. So this young Marine comes up to my desk and he says, where is that? I've been watching you in that yellow dress. I never saw him before. My yellow dress was a maternity dress, and I'm wondering why was he watching this in this yellow dress? And he was from a family of 10, lots of girls, 7 girls, 3 boys. He's from Maryland. This was his first duty station. We ended up going on dates, and now for 50 years we've been married this year. But when we married, he married a, thank you. 5 days after we were married, my son died very suddenly. So when we married, he married a ready-made family. He's never been married before, and we both were young. And so when he would, before I transferred to Maryland to work for the Army, and it was a while before I got the job. Somebody else was in the job, they were transferring out, so they were waiting for that person to leave, and we couldn't rub 2 quarters together. And so every day, I had one daily word. Every day, I would write out the daily word on a 3x5 card, and I'd stick it in his lunch. Every day for lunch, we either had peanut butter and jelly, or we had tuna. And now we say those were the good old days. You know, sometimes that brings out more of your connectedness. Well, anyway, so he would go off to work. He never said anything about the 3x5 card. I took my time and write the 3x5. He never said a word about it. So the Marine Corps birthday came along. It's in November, and all the families are invited. So I get over to where he worked, and I walk in the door, and the gunny sergeant, Gunny Hammy, holds out his arm and says, so you're Sandra. I've been waiting to meet you. And all his Marine Corps buddies come around. I'm like, what? So he had, his desk had a glass top. And under that glass top was every single daily word in date order. And every day when he came to work, they all waited for him to, when he got ready to open his lunch, what's our word for the day? Release your inner genius. You don't even realize how simple things you do.
Great story.
Yeah, simple things you do. The daily word is everything. And now I use the Universal Foundation for Better Livings in addition to the daily word. And I want to read you today's inspiration as I close. Okay, the daily inspiration for better living is what the late Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman and her team put together. And the one thing I like about it especially is the 12 powers. So the book includes the 12 powers. It's like Unity's daily word because it's 2 months at a time. Each book is 2 months. But this book is July and August. And of course, July is understanding and August is will. And you can have all the understanding in the world, but if you're not willing to put your feet to your prayers, it ain't gonna work. It ain't gonna work. Huh? What'd you say? Yeah. You can have all, I've got a little plaque here that I bought for my daughter because she's in HR and she was always telling me about how she had to keep answering the same questions over and over, the same people. And I got this for her and it says, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. So, So you can have all the understanding in the world, but if you don't put feet to your prayers, it ain't gonna work. So today is Thursday, July 18th, and the word from the Daily Inspiration for Better Living is sleep on it. As we move through the hustle and bustle of our daily activities, we often have encounters that call for decisions or choices on our part. Often the decision can be made immediately. However, there are some decisions that need concentrated thought and special consideration. One solution is to sleep on it. Take time to look at all the facts related to the decision that must be made. Then put the facts in order of importance to the situation with a little emotion, as little emotion as possible. Release the situation to God. When you retire to your bed at night, do so without worry or concern about the situation. Release it lovingly and confidently to God. Sleeping on it allows us to temporarily remove ourselves from the situation and release any emotional attachments. Let me add, you'd be like the Buddhist vacuum cleaner, no attachments. When we awaken, we can make the right choice. Release the entire situation to God and sleep on it. The scripture is from Jeremiah, the 21st chapter, the 12th verse, in the New King James Version. Exercise judgment in the morning. Exercise judgment in the morning. So, release, you're going to go away from here. Your minds are full of information. We're almost on information overload, aren't we? So I'm going to provide you 6 simple techniques to stimulate creativity and release your inner genius. First, get you a big basket and put on little slips of paper all the goodies in your mind. You know, those ideas that you haven't really done anything with, something that you've been holding on to. One of the, some of us live on Someday Isle, and it's crowded. It's time to get off Someday Isle and start putting together what God has presented to you. We all know where that genius comes from. It's there. Be brave and courageous. Now, you can't just go around telling everybody what you're thinking and what you're dreaming, right? You got to be brave and courageous, but you got to step out on faith. And remember, opportunities are unlimited. It's just like quantum physics, right? You said this earlier, everything is everywhere all the time. You can think something and the person way over here says it, and you go, that was just what I was thinking. Why? Because thoughts are things. Thoughts are energy, right? And so we're all in the same soup of quantum physics. So there are all kinds of opportunities, but you got to stop questioning and doubting yourself. See, understanding is about doubting Thomas, who questioned everything, which is important. Question, is this mine to do? And lean into your imagination. Don't resist it, even if it sounds crazy. I'm sure when they wrote some of those cartoons and the Jetsons at the beginning, somebody said, that's kind of stupid, that's kind of dumb. But look at it today, it's not a cartoon, it's a reality. Rely on your source. Go to the source. Charles Fillmore used to say, I'm going to headquarters. When he had a question, I'm going to headquarters. I'm not going to ask you and you and you. I'm going to consult with the master. So I might have to sleep on it. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Somebody else is going to tell you that's not going to work, but be like Ruth Mosley. Do it anyway. And I love what Dr. Seuss said. Think left, think right, and think low and think high. Oh, the things you can think of if only you try. We can learn a lot from children. And so, in fact, I had a little cartoon there about children and how we learn so much from our inner child, or our little picture. Unless you become as children, you will not inherit the kingdom of God. That means using your imagination. Think about when you were a child, all the imaginary things you did, all the fun things you came up with. We played rock school, we played teacher, we played everything. We played, and Mr. Rogers said that's how you learn. You play about things. Play about it in your own mind. You have to unleash your creative genius. These are some of the geniuses that we've talked about this week. And you'll notice J.L. Milne, who wrote the Pooh Bear series, says, you are braver than you believe, and stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. Why? Because you are a creative genius. Let it out. Release your inner genius. Thank you.